"Bring her to my room," the mafia boss ordered when he saw her alone in the hall. The crystal chandeliers of the Belmore Grand Hotel dripped light onto the men below, but the light never seemed to reach their eyes from her place by the service door. Elena Moretti watched them. At 23, she had learned that the most dangerous things in the world did not look dangerous. They looked like this: men in $4,000 suits, with hands that rested too calmly on the table and voices that never rose above a polite murmur. This was Belmore, a city of cold steel and colder hearts, and this ballroom was its pulsing ventricle. Elena was just a ghost here, hired for the night to refill water glasses and clear plates, to be invisible. It was a high-stakes meeting. The hotel manager had stressed, his face pale, a gathering of the syndicates. The Vescari family was hosting. Elena's own heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage too small. She was always nervous, but this was different. The air was thick with unspoken power, with the scent of expensive bourbon and the metallic tang of something that might have been fear, or perhaps just ambition. She kept her eyes down, her movements small and efficient. Observe. Don't be observed. Survive. It was a mantra she had lived by for the past 6 months, ever since she'd fled to Belmore with nothing but a bus ticket and a change of clothes. She was a quiet girl, with eyes that saw too much and a past that clung to her like a shroud. It was there in the way she flinched when a voice was raised, in the way she favored her left side. It was visible, if one bothered to look, in the faint yellowing bruise that crept from beneath the high collar of her white uniform shirt, a sickening blossom against her collarbone. She'd hidden it with makeup, but under the harsh lights, she felt as if it were screaming. She was clearing champagne flutes when the main doors to the ballroom swung open. A hush did not fall. It seized the room. The murmuring stopped mid-word. The clinking of silver on china paused. Elena looked up, her breath catching. Dominic Vescari had arrived. He was 32, but he moved with the ancient, predatory grace of something much older. He was tall, dressed in a suit so black it seemed to drink the light. His face was all harsh angles and cold control. His dark hair swept back from a strong brow. He was not handsome in the way of movie stars. He was compelling in the way of a storm front, beautiful and menacing, promising destruction. He didn't walk into the room. He consumed it. 2 men flanked him, broad-shouldered and silent, their eyes scanning every corner. His entourage. Dominic's gaze swept the room once, a brief, assessing glance that missed nothing and dismissed everything. He was the unchallenged ruler of this underworld, the boss of the Vescari syndicate, and every person in this ballroom knew that their fortune, and perhaps their continued existence, depended on his mood. Elena shrank back, pressing herself against the damask wallpaper. Her job was to be furniture, and she had never wanted to be furniture more than she did right now. She watched him take his seat at the head of the long, imposing table, a king ascending his throne. The conversations resumed, but they were different now, more subdued. Every word weighed for an hour. She moved on the periphery, a satellite to their dark star. She refilled his water, her hand trembling so badly she nearly spilled it. He didn't look at her, and he didn't acknowledge her. She was less than air. She was grateful for it. The evening wore on, the tension coiling tighter with every toast. Elena was stacking a tray high with dessert plates when a hand clamped down on her waist. She froze, the porcelain rattling. "Well, look at this!" A slurred voice breathed against her ear. It was one of the guests, a man with a flushed face and piggy eyes. Not from Dominic's table, but one of the rival Marcano attendees. They're hiding the pretty ones in the corners. His hand wasn't just on her waist, it was moving, his thick fingers digging into her hip, sliding lower. "Sir, please," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. She tried to pull away, but he gripped her tighter, pulling her back against him. The tray wobbled. "Come on, sweetheart. A girl like you shouldn't be working. You should be." His fingers pinched her brutally. A strangled cry tore from her throat. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded her system. It wasn't just the violation, it was the trap. It was the feeling of being held, of a man's strength turned cruel. It was the memory of him. She reacted without thinking. She shoved the tray forward, not at him, but away from herself, letting it crash onto a nearby service cart. Plates shattered, chocolate mousse and broken glass sprayed across the carpet. In the stunned silence that followed, she ran. She didn't look back. She pushed through the service door, her feet pounding down the thickly carpeted corridor, past the gilded mirrors and the tasteful, dim sconces. She didn't stop until she found a small, recessed alcove meant for staff, a dark pocket of quiet between the main hall and a set of elevators. She collapsed against the wall, her entire body shaking. The sobs came instantly, violent and silent, tearing through her with an agony that had little to do with the man in the ballroom and everything to do with the man she had run from. She choked them back, pressing the heels of her hands into her eyes, terrified of making a sound. She was going to be fired. After all her work, all her careful invisibility, she was going to be fired. Or worse, the man he groped her. What if he complained? What if he came looking for her? Her breath came in ragged, painful gasps. She fumbled with the high collar of her uniform, pulling it away from her throat, desperate for air. The movement exposed the angry, mottled bruise more clearly in the dim light. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered. She just wanted to be safe. She just wanted one night. One single night, where she didn't feel like prey. Across the corridor, standing in the shadow of a marble archway, Dominic Vascari watched. He had seen the small, pathetic commotion, the shattered plates, the girl fleeing like a spooked deer. It was nothing. It was a mess for the hotel to clean up. But he had also seen the man who had grabbed her, a Marcano lieutenant, a pig named Gallo. And now, he saw her. She wasn't like the other women in the hotel, the ones dripping in diamonds and armored with false smiles. This girl was broken. She was huddled in the shadows, her shoulders shaking, her hands pressed to her face as if she could physically hold herself together. She was small and pale and looked utterly, devastatingly alone. She didn't belong here. She was a field mouse in a viper pit. Something in him, something cold and long dormant, shifted. It was not pity. Pity was a weakness. It was curiosity, an impulse. A sudden, sharp desire to pull that small, trembling thing out of the shadows and see what it looked like in the light. He watched her for another 10 seconds, her silent sobs echoing in the grand, empty hallway. Then, he turned to the man standing rigidly at his side, his personal enforcer. "Bring her to my room," Dominic commanded, his voice a low rumble. The man, Luca, didn't blink. He didn't ask which room or why. He simply inclined his head. "Boss." Dominic turned and walked toward the private elevator, his decision already forgotten, the consequences already in motion. Elena was just beginning to regain control of her breathing when a shadow fell over her. She looked up, her eyes wide with terror. A man stood before her. He was huge, dressed in the same impossibly black suit as the men at the head table, his face a mask of polite indifference. "Miss," he said. And his voice was not unkind, but it held the absolute lack of negotiation. "I'm so sorry," Elena babbled, scrambling to her feet, wiping at her wet cheeks. "The tray, I didn't mean. I'll pay for it. Please, I don't want any trouble. I'll clean it up." "Mr. Vascari would like to see you," the man said, as if she hadn't spoken. Elena's blood turned to ice. Vascari. Not the hotel manager, not the pig who had grabbed her, the man at the head of the table, the king. "Me?" Her voice was a squeak. I think there's a mistake. He doesn't know me. I'm just—" "There is no mistake," the man said. He gestured politely down the hall, toward the private elevators. "This way." It was not a request. Elena's mind raced. This was it. She was going to be punished for the scene, for disturbing the meeting. Men like that. Men with that much power. They didn't tolerate disruptions. They eliminated them. She thought about running again. But where? The man was a mountain. And beyond him, the hotel was filled with them. Running was not an option. "Please," she whispered. One last, desperate plea. "I just want to go home. "After you speak with Mr. Viscari," the man said. He was patient, like a man waiting for a child to finish a tantrum, numb with a terror so profound it felt like a dream. Elena walked. Her legs felt like water, but she put one foot in front of the other. The man, Luca, followed 2 paces behind, a silent, looming presence. He didn't touch her, but she felt his proximity like a brand. The elevator was private, all dark wood and gold fixtures. It whisked them upward in complete silence. Elena stared at her reflection in the polished brass, seeing a terrified girl with red-rimmed eyes and a future that had just narrowed to this single, terrifying moment. The doors opened onto the penthouse floor, the suite. The man used a key card, and the door swung open onto a room so large it looked more like a lobby. It was dark, the curtains drawn, the only light coming from the city's glow far below, painting the opulent furniture in shades of gray and blue. "In here," the man said, gesturing to a room off the main salon. Elena's heart was beating so hard she thought it might burst. She stepped inside. It was an office, or perhaps a study. A massive mahogany desk sat before a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the entire city. And sitting behind the desk, a glass of dark liquid in his hand, was Dominic Viscari. He didn't look up at first. He was swirling the amber liquid, watching the city lights. The door clicked shut behind Elena, leaving her alone with him. The silence was absolute, suffocating. She stood just inside the doorway, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She was trembling again, but she refused to cry. Not in front of him, finally. He spoke, his voice quiet, almost gentle. "You're shaking." Elena said nothing. She couldn't. He motioned to a plush leather chair opposite his desk. "Sit." She obeyed, perching on the very edge of the cushion, her back rigid. He looked at her then. His gaze was intense, analytical, like a scientist studying a new and unusual specimen. He wasn't looking at her with lust, not like the man in the ballroom. He was looking at her with a calculating stillness that was infinitely more unsettling. "Do you want a drink?" he asked. "Water? Brandy?" Elena managed to shake her head. Her throat was too tight to speak. "You caused quite a disturbance downstairs," he observed. He still hadn't raised his voice. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words rusty. "It was an accident. The plates. I tripped. I'm so sorry. I'll pay for everything." Dominic's mouth twitched, the barest hint of a smile that held no humor. "You're a terrible liar." He leaned forward, steepling his fingers on the desk. "Gallo," he said. "The man who grabbed you, he's an associate of the Marcano family, a disgusting creature. But you already knew that." Elena's eyes widened. "You knew what he was," Dominic continued, his voice soft. "You knew what this meeting was. You've been terrified since the moment I walked in, but you weren't scared of me. You were scared of them." "Why?" Elena stared at him, her mind blank with panic. He saw too much. He was dissecting her. I don't know what you mean," she stammered. "I'm just a server. I don't want trouble." That phrase again. It seemed to amuse him. No one ever wants trouble, sweetheart. Trouble just finds them. He stood up, slow and fluid, and walked around the desk. Elena flinched, pressing herself back into the chair, her hand instinctively flying to her collar. He stopped, his eyes dropping to her hand. "What are you hiding?" he asked, his voice still gentle. "Nothing. Please." He didn't move for a long moment. He just watched her, his dark eyes fixed on the spot her hand was covering. Then, very slowly, he reached out. He didn't grab her. He simply extended his hand, his fingers stopping an inch from her skin. "Move your hand," he commanded. It was not a request. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, hot and stinging. She was trapped, slowly, agonizingly. She lowered her hand. She had pulled the collar aside when she was crying, and the cheap foundation had smeared. The bruise was stark against her pale skin. It was ugly, a deep purple ringed with sickly yellow, in the distinct shape of fingers, a handprint branded into her flesh. Dominic's face did not change. His expression remained one of cold, detached interest, but a muscle in his jaw clenched. Once. He looked from the bruise back to her eyes. "Who did this to you?" Elena looked down at her lap. "I fell," she whispered. A sharp, humorless sound, almost a laugh, escaped him. "You fell?" He leaned in closer, and she could smell the faint, clean scent of expensive soap and the sharp tang of the brandy. "You fell against a man's hand, hard, repeatedly." She said nothing, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I don't want trouble," she whispered again. The only prayer she knew? Dominic was silent for a long time. He straightened up, turning away from her to look out the window at the sprawling, indifferent city. "You know," he said, his voice musing, "in my world, when someone hurts something that belongs to another man, it's a declaration of war." He turned back to her, his eyes unreadable. "And when someone hurts something that is defenseless, that is just an invitation." He walked back to his desk, but he didn't sit. He leaned against it, crossing his arms. He looked at her. This small, broken thing in his vast, empty suite. "If someone's hurting you," he said, his voice flat, a statement of fact, "they're already in trouble." Elena's breath hitched. He wasn't offering comfort. It was a threat, but it wasn't aimed at her. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, her voice trembling, but, for the first time, present. Dominic studied her. The impulsive curiosity that had made him summon her was hardening into something else, a resolve. He didn't know why, and he didn't care to analyze it. He had made a decision. "I want you to stay here tonight," he said. Elena's head snapped up. "What?" "Stay here, on the couch in the living room. My men are downstairs. Luca will be posted outside this door. No one will get in. No one will touch you." "But why?" she asked, her mind reeling. This was not the attack she had expected. It was something stranger, something she couldn't understand. "Because you're a terrible liar," he said simply. "And because I don't like when men like Gallo think they can take whatever they want." He paused. "And because I'm curious to see what you look like when you're not terrified." He was offering her safety? This man, the most dangerous man in Belmore, was offering her sanctuary. It was a contradiction so vast, she couldn't process it. I can't," she said, thinking of her apartment, her job. "You can," he countered. "Your manager has already been informed that you were unwell and that I am taking care of it. You've been compensated for your shift generously." He'd already arranged it. He had known she would be here, that she would... What? Accept? He had trapped her, not with violence, but with a velvet-lined cage. "Just for the night," he said, his voice softening just a fraction. "Just rest. Safely. No one will bother you." Elena looked at him, really looked at him. At the power he held so easily, at the cold certainty in his eyes, he was a monster. She was sure of it, but he was not the monster she was running from. And tonight, he was the only thing standing between her and a world that wanted to devour her. She thought of the pig downstairs. She thought of the locks on her apartment door, locks that had already been broken once. She thought of the bruise on her collarbone. Slowly, hesitantly, she gave a single, silent nod. Elena woke to the unfamiliar sensation of complete silence. The light was wrong, a thin, buttery yellow instead of the harsh gray that usually forced its way through her apartment's grimy window. She was warm, unbearably, luxuriously warm. She was on a couch, a massive thing of soft, dove-gray leather, and she was cocooned in a cashmere blanket so heavy it felt like a hug. For a moment she was adrift, her mind foggy with the first deep sleep she'd had in months. Then it all came rushing back. The ballroom. The pig, Gallo, the shattering plates, the terrifyingly calm man in the black suit, Dominic Vescari. She sat up with a gasp, the blanket pooling around her waist. She was in the hotel suite, in the vast, empty living room. The city glittered below, awake and indifferent. She was still in her server's uniform, the stiff white shirt wrinkled, the high collar still chafing her throat. She looked around, her heart thumping a heavy, fearful rhythm. He was gone. The door to the study was closed. The door to the bedroom was closed. She was alone. On the glass coffee table in front of her, there was a tray. It held a delicate porcelain teapot, a matching cup and saucer, and a small, covered plate. She touched the side of the pot. It was still warm. She lifted the lid from the plate. 2 perfect golden scones. He had left her tea. Dominic Vascari, the man who commanded the city's shadows, the man who had summoned her with a word, had not touched her. He had not come near her. He had covered her with a blanket while she slept the sleep of the dead, and he had left her breakfast. The kindness was so alien, so deeply at odds with the man, that it frightened her more than any threat could have. She wrapped her arms around herself, a familiar, protective gesture. It was a gesture she had learned 6 months ago, the night she had ceased to be Alessia Bianchi and become Elena Moretti. The memory rose unbidden, as it always did in these rare moments of quiet. It was not a memory, but a haunting. Marco, his face. So handsome when he smiled, so twisted when he did not. He was a Marcano, a distant cousin, but close enough to the power to feel entitled to it. And he had decided he was entitled to her. At first, it was charm, gifts, a possessiveness she mistook for passion. Then the possessiveness had curdled. It was a comment about her dress, a hand gripping her arm just a little too tight, a request that she not see her friends. The night she left, he had found texts on her phone from her sister. Innocent, worried. He had called it betrayal. The flashback was sharp, a shard of glass in her mind, his voice, not shouting, but low and venomous. You think you can hide things from me? You think you belong to anyone but me? He had grabbed her, his fingers digging into her collarbone, slamming her against the wall. The bruise that was just now fading was a mirror of this one, the original sin. She'd seen the look in his eyes, a void of rage, and she knew, with chilling certainty, that he would one day kill her. Not on purpose, perhaps, but in a fit of passion, and he would weep over her body and call it love. So while he slept, his arm thrown possessively over her waist, even in his drunken slumber, she had slipped away. She took $300 from his wallet, a theft that still burned her with shame, though she knew it was survival and a small backpack. She took a bus 2 states over, to Belmore, a city where she knew no one. She became Elena Moretti, a ghost, a server, a quiet girl who flinched at loud noises and never, ever let a man get close. Until last night, when she had fallen into the orbit of a man more powerful and more dangerous than Marco could ever dream of being. A soft knock on the suite door made her jump, spilling the tea she had just poured. The man from last night, Luca, entered without waiting for an answer. His face was as impassive as stone. "Mr. Vascari has arranged a car to take you home, Miss Moretti," he said. He knows my name," she whispered. "We will also have a man follow you to ensure you arrive safely." Elena stood, her legs shaking. "Please, that's not... You don't need to. I'm fine. Really, please thank Mr. Vascari for the room and the tea. But I don't need anyone to follow me." She could not bear the thought of those dark, watchful eyes on her. She had run from one cage. She would not walk into another. Luca regarded her for a moment. "As you wish," he said, though his tone suggested it made no difference. "The car is downstairs." 20 minutes later, she was standing outside her run-down apartment building. The black sedan that had dropped her off had pulled away, but as she fumbled for her keys, she saw it. Another black sedan, parked across the street, half hidden in the shade of an oak tree. 2 men in the front seat. They weren't trying very hard to hide. He had followed her anyway. The paranoia, the feeling of being watched, prickled at her skin all day. She went to her other job, a grueling 8-hour shift at a downtown diner, and every time the bell above the door jangled, her head snapped up, expecting to see Marco or Dominic or one of his stone-faced men. When she finally returned to her apartment just after 10 at night, the black sedan was still there. She locked her door, sliding the deadbolt and jamming a chair under the knob, a flimsy ritual that gave her no comfort. Her apartment was small, One room with a kitchenette and a bathroom, the paint peeling, the faucet dripping. It was a miserable place. But it was hers. She was exhausted, her bones aching, but she was too agitated to sleep. The events of the last 24 hours swirled in her mind. Dominic Vascari, his strange, cold courtesy, the bruise, the men outside, they're already in trouble. What did that mean? She was pulling clothes from her small duffel bag, the one she always kept half-packed, when she heard it, a sound at her door. Not a knock, a scratching, metallic sound. Someone was picking the lock. Elena froze, her blood turning to ice. She backed away from the door, her eyes wide, a scream lodging in her throat. The sedan outside. They were supposed to be protecting her. Were they? Or were they the ones trying to get in? The chair she had wedged under the knob screeched as it was pushed back. The flimsy door burst open, splintering the frame. 2 men spilled into the room. They were not Vascari's men. She knew them. She had seen them with Marco. Their faces were cruel, familiar. "Well, well," the first one said, smiling, showing stained teeth. He was big, burly, in a leather jacket. "Look who we found. Marco's been worried sick about you. Alessia." Her real name. The sound of it from his lips was a violation. "Get out," she whispered, her voice trembling. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, holding it out with a hand that shook so badly she could barely grip it. The second man, wiry and pale, just laughed. "She's got a knife. How cute." "Marco wants you back," the first one said, advancing on her slowly. "He wants us to bring you back in one piece. But he said we could rough you up a little." "A reminder of who you belong to." He lunged. Elena screamed and slashed with the knife, but he just batted it away, his meaty hand grabbing her wrist, twisting it until she shrieked in pain. The knife clattered to the floor. "Stupid," he snarled, pulling her toward him. Suddenly, the broken doorway was filled again. "Let her go." It was Luca. Behind him stood another Vascari soldier, his face just as grim. The Marcano man holding Elena didn't release her. He laughed, surprised, and pulled her tighter, his arm snaking around her throat, using her as a shield. "Vascari's men, what's this? The boss found Marco's sloppy seconds?" Luca's face did not change, but his eyes went dead. "Last chance." The man holding Elena put a gun to her temple. "You back off, or I'll—" He never finished the sentence. There was a blur of motion. Luca moved with a speed that was terrifying, inhuman. He wasn't aiming for the man, he was aiming for the arm holding Elena. There was a sickening crack of bone. The man screamed, his grip loosening, the gun firing uselessly into the ceiling. In that single, agonizing second of release, the second Vascari man was on the wiry one, a blur of efficient, brutal punches. It was not a fight. It was an execution. 2 thuds, and the wiry man was on the floor, unconscious. Luca disarmed the first man, who was clutching his broken arm, and slammed him against the wall. The whole thing took less than 5 seconds. Elena had collapsed to the floor, her back against the kitchen cabinets, hyperventilating. She was alive. They had saved her. The apartment was a wreck. The door was destroyed. 2 men were groaning on her floor, and then a third man stepped through the shattered doorway, his presence sucking all the air from the room. Dominic Vascari. He wore no suit, just black trousers and a gray cashmere sweater that made him look less like a boss and more like a predator at rest. His eyes swept the room once, taking in the scene with cold assessment. He looked at the bound Marcano men, then at Luca, and gave a single, curt nod. Then his gaze fell on Elena. She was a mess, her face white with terror, tears streaming down her cheeks, her body shaking so violently she looked as if she might come apart. He ignored everyone else. He walked past his men, past the intruders, and crouched in front of her. He was so close. She could feel the heat radiating from him. He didn't touch her. "They knew your name," he said. It was not a question. She could only nod, a sob tearing from her chest. "You're not safe here," he said, his voice quiet, but absolute. "You're coming with me, now." She didn't argue. She didn't have the strength. The last of her carefully constructed independence had shattered with her front door. She looked at this terrifying man, who had sent angels of violence to protect her, and she nodded again. He held out a hand. She took it. His grip was strong and warm, and he pulled her to her feet as if she weighed nothing. The Vescari estate was not a house. It was a fortress of dark stone and sheer glass, perched high on the hills overlooking Belmore, a sentinel guarding the city it owned. They drove through iron gates, up a long, winding drive, and he led her inside. The interior was all clean lines, dark wood, and silence. He took her to a guest suite on the second floor. It was 3 times the size of her apartment, with a king-sized bed, a marble bathroom, and a sitting area with its own fireplace. "You'll stay here," he said. He left her for a moment, and she stood in the center of the opulent room, feeling small and hopelessly lost. He returned, holding something in his hands. It was a robe, made of a heavy, dark green silk that shimmered in the low light. He held it out to her. "There's a bathroom through there," he said, his voice low. "Clothes will be brought for you in the morning." She just stared at the robe, her mind still back in her apartment, with the gun to her head. He stepped closer, and she flinched. He stopped immediately. "No one," he said, and his voice was so firm, so absolute it cut through her panic. "Will ever touch you again. Not in this house. Not unless you ask them to." He placed the robe on the bed, his hand lingering for a moment on the soft fabric. "I give you my word." Later that night, she couldn't sleep. She was clean, wrapped in the impossibly soft silk, but her mind was racing. She was sitting in an armchair by the unlit fireplace when her door opened. Dominic stood there, holding 2 glasses of wine. He didn't ask to come in. He just did, closing the door softly behind him. He handed her one of the glasses. She took it, her fingers brushing his. A jolt, like static, passed between them. He sat in the chair opposite her, the 2 of them cloaked in shadow. The city lights a distant, jeweled carpet below. "Tell me," he said. It was not a command this time. "Tell me why 2 Marcano soldiers broke into a banquet server's apartment and called her Alessia." And she did. The story poured out of her, a torrent of shame and fear she had held inside for 6 months. She told him about Marco, about the charm and the control, about the first time he hit her and the 100th. She told him about his family, their casual cruelty, their power. She told him about running, about changing her name, about the constant gnawing fear. I'm so stupid," she finished, the tears she'd been fighting finally falling. I let him do that to me. I'm so ashamed." Dominic said nothing for a long time. He just watched her, his face a mask in the darkness, the only light the reflection of the city in his dark eyes. When she finally fell silent, her confession hanging in the air between them, he put his wineglass down and moved. He didn't sit. He knelt in front of her chair, so close his knees were almost touching hers. The scent of him, clean and sharp, surrounded her. "He broke me," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. There's nothing left." He looked at her, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. He saw the tear tracks on her cheeks, the faint, fading bruise on her collarbone, the raw terror in her eyes. "I don't want to break you," he said, his voice rough, thick with an emotion she couldn't name. A single, defiant spark lit inside her. She met his gaze. "I'm already broken." His eyes dropped to her mouth. The air in the room became thick, heavy, charged with a silent, crackling energy. He leaned in. It was impossibly slow. He gave her every chance to pull away, to protest. His face was inches from hers. She could feel the warmth of his breath, see the individual dark lashes that framed his eyes. He wanted to kiss her. And the most terrifying part? She wanted him to. His lips were a fraction of an inch from hers. She could feel the heat, the promise, but it was too much. The memory of Marco, of a man's touch meaning pain, of being trapped, overwhelmed her. She flinched, a small, involuntary gasp escaping her, and pulled back, her eyes squeezing shut. Dominic froze, instantly. He did not push, he did not cajole, he did not try to convince her. He simply pulled back, the heat and the promise vanishing. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, giving her space. Putting the air back in her lungs, the moment was gone, shattered by her fear. He walked to the door, his back straight. He paused, his hand on the knob, and looked back at her. She was huddled in the chair, a small, trembling thing wrapped in his silk. "Get some sleep, Elena," he said. His voice quiet, devoid of anger or frustration. Just quiet. "You're not broken." He left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving her alone in the vast, silent room. Elena brought a trembling hand to her lips. She was shaking, but for the first time in as long as she could remember. She was not cold. Life in the Vescari estate was a study in profound and unsettling contradictions. Elena woke every morning in a bed softer than any cloud, the sheets smelling faintly of lavender and sunshine. A wardrobe had been filled for her with beautiful, simple clothes, cashmere sweaters, soft denim, silk blouses, and linen dresses, all in quiet, unassuming colors, as if Dominic had instinctively known she would hate anything loud. The luxury was stifling. It was a gilded cage, and in the first few days, she felt the bars pressing in. The silence was the loudest thing she had ever heard. It was the silence of absolute security, of thick walls and thicker glass, of a staff that moved like ghosts. But Elena was not built for idleness. She was a woman who had survived by moving, by working, by making herself useful. She could not simply be a doll, kept safe on a high shelf. On the third morning, she followed the smell of coffee and bread to the cavernous kitchen. It was a gleaming expanse of stainless steel and dark marble, but it was also the warmest room in the house. A stout, gray-haired woman in a crisp apron was kneading dough with practiced, powerful hands. She looked up as Elena hovered in the doorway, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "You are lost, miss?" the woman asked, her voice laced with a thick Italian accent. "No," Elena said, her hands twisting in front of her. I'm Elena. I was wondering, that is, could I help?" The woman, Mrs. Greco, the estate's housekeeper and undisputed ruler of the domestic staff, raised a flowery eyebrow. "Help? I'm a good cook," Elena said quickly, the words tumbling out. "I mean diner food, mostly, but I can chop, I can peel, I can scrub, I need to do something with my hands." Mrs. Greco studied her for a long moment, seeing past the expensive new clothes to the raw, nervous energy vibrating underneath. She saw a girl who was not a mistress, not a guest, but a refugee. "You know how to dice an onion without crying all over my floor?" she asked. A small, genuine smile touched Elena's lips for the first time in a week. "Yes, ma'am." "Then find an apron. We start the soup stock in 10 minutes. It became her saving grace. She rose every morning at 6, dressed in simple jeans and a sweater, and reported to the kitchen. She chopped vegetables. She learned to bake Mrs. Greco's grandmother's bread. She polished silver until it gleamed. She organized the pantry. She worked, the staff, who had at first treated her with a wary, respectful distance, this strange, quiet girl who belonged to the boss, began to unbend. They saw her work as hard as they did, her hands, though pale, becoming chapped and raw. They saw her clean her own plate, her pleases and thank yous genuine. The bodyguards were a different story. They were posted everywhere, silent sentinels in dark suits. They were Luca's men, and they watched her with the same impassive vigilance they applied to everything. She was a package to be protected, the boss's high-value asset. One chilly morning, she saw 2 of them posted by the terrace doors, Luca and another man, staring out at the gray, misty lawn. They had been there for hours. On impulse, she poured 2 heavy mugs of coffee, rich with steamed milk, the way Mrs. Greco had shown her, and carried them out. She held them up. The second man, Rico, looked at her, then at Luca, his eyes wide with surprise. "Thank you, miss," Luca said, his voice flat, but he took the mug. "Elena," she corrected him quietly. She offered the other to Rico, who took it as if it might explode. "You shouldn't be serving us," Rico stammered. "It's just coffee," she said. "It's cold out." She walked back inside, unaware of the silent, profound shift that had just occurred. She was not a damsel in a tower. She was a worker. She was one of them, and of Dominic. She saw almost nothing. He was a ghost in his own home. She would hear the distant rumble of his voice from his study, or see his car, a black armored beast, sweeping down the drive. He left before she woke, returned long after she had retired to her room, exhausted from a day of physical labor. She was safe, she was fed, and she was, in a strange way, content. But beneath it all, a different kind of tension was building. The memory of his almost kiss, of his rough, quiet voice saying, "I don't want to break you," was a low, humming wire stretched tight inside her. She felt his presence in the house like a change in barometric pressure. It had been almost 2 weeks. The moon was high and full, flooding the immaculate gardens with pale, silver light. Elena couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, her mind too active. She was wearing a simple cotton nightgown and one of the cashmere cardigans, and she padded barefoot through the dark, silent house. She found herself in the grand salon, a room she never entered, and saw the tall French doors were open to the night air. A terrace of blue stone tile overlooked a vast, formal garden. The air was cool and smelled of jasmine and damp earth. A fountain splashed musically in the distance. She stepped out, her feet cold on the stone. She felt a sudden, inexplicable rush of freedom. Here, in this massive, silent fortress, under the watch of a killer, she was safer than she had ever been in her life. She thought of Marco, and the fear was a dull, distant ache, not the sharp, immediate terror. She was healing. A faint melody was drifting from somewhere, perhaps a radio in the guards' quarters. It was something classical, a slow, sad cello, on impulse. Elena lifted her arms, closed her eyes, and turned. Just a slow, simple spin, the cardigan flaring out around her. She wasn't a dancer, but in that moment, she felt a grace she hadn't known she possessed. She let her head fall back, the moonlight on her face, and turned again, a private, quiet celebration of her own survival. He had been on the upper balcony, a glass of bourbon in his hand, watching the moon. Then he saw her, a small, pale figure, moving like a ghost in his garden. He'd been watching her for days, though she didn't know it. He'd watched her in the kitchen with Mrs. Greco, her face smudged with flour. He'd seen her bring coffee to his men, a gesture of simple, unassuming kindness that had stunned them into silence. This quiet, resilient girl was a mystery. She was terrified of him, yet she moved through his house with a growing, gentle confidence. And now, she was dancing. She was dancing alone in the moonlight, a picture of such profound, unguarded innocence that it struck him, a physical blow deep in his chest. He moved before he had a conscious thought. He went down the stairs, silent on the marble, and through the salon. She stilled, sensing him before she heard him. She stopped, her arms falling to her sides, and turned. He was standing in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the indoor light. He was just in a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, and dark trousers. He looked unguarded, tired, and impossibly dangerous. "Don't stop," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate on her skin. She couldn't move. She just watched him as he walked toward her, out into the moonlight. The silence between them was deafening, crackling with the unresolved tension of their last encounter. He stopped just in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to look at him. She could smell the faint, sharp scent of his bourbon, and beneath it, the clean, male scent of him. "You seem—" He searched for the word, his eyes scanning her face. "Better." "I'm safe," she whispered, which was not the same thing at all, and they both knew it. His gaze was intense, analytical, but underneath it was something else, something raw. He had not touched her since that night. He had given her space. He had waited, and now, seeing her, so soft and real in the moonlight, his control was fraying. He lifted his hand, his movements achingly slow, giving her every chance to retreat. "You're not afraid of me right now," he stated. She wasn't. It was the strangest thing. His proximity was overwhelming, but the fear was gone. His fingertips, rough and calloused, brushed her cheek, and she saw it. His hand, the hand that signed death warrants, the hand that ruled a city, was trembling, just slightly. That single, visible sign of vulnerability undid her. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut, a small, unconscious sigh escaping her lips. It was all the invitation he needed. His other hand moved to her waist, his grip firm, possessive, pulling her against him. There was no space, no air. She was flush against the hard, warm wall of his chest, and she could feel the heavy, thudding beat of his heart. Or maybe it was hers. His head dipped. His lips brushed hers. A breath. A question. She didn't move. She just waited. He brushed them again. A whisper of a touch, and she let out a small, broken sound. He took the sound as a yes. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, fumbling kiss she had braced herself for. It was slow, deliberate. He kissed her as if he was learning her, as if he had all the time in the world. It was careful, yet it was steeped in a hunger so profound it made her knees weak. His lips were firm, warm, and they moved over hers with a devastating, patient confidence. Her hands, which had been frozen at her sides, slowly came up. She didn't cling to him. She rested them flat on his chest, feeling the solid, coiled strength of him, the frantic beat of his heart beneath her palms. He deepened the kiss, his tongue tracing her lower lip, and she opened for him. It was an invasion, a conquest, but it was one she was surrendering to willingly. It was everything. It was the promise of safety, the thrill of danger. It was a man who saw her, broken and bruised, and did not turn away. It was too much. The old voices. Marco's voice whispered in her head, "You're nothing, you're mine." She was being held. A man's hands were on her. She was sinking. She tore her mouth away, gasping, her hands pushing against his chest. I can't." He didn't release her. He held her fast, his hand on her waist, his other hand moving to cup her jaw, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were black in the moonlight, his breathing harsh. I'm not a toy," she whispered, tears of confusion and fear welling. "I'm not just something you're playing with. I can't be." His expression hardened, but not with anger, with a fierce, cold conviction. "I don't play with toys, Elena," he said, his voice a low, rough growl. His thumb stroked her cheek, wiping away a tear she didn't know had fallen. "I don't touch what I don't want to keep." The words hung in the night air, more binding than any contract, more intimate than the kiss. Keep? A word that should have terrified her, but from his lips, it sounded like a vow. It sounded like forever. The next morning, the spell was broken. The real world came crashing in. Dominic was in his study. The sun was streaming in, but the mood was dark. Antonio, his consigliere, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and the cautious eyes of a diplomat, sat opposite him. Luca stood by the door. "It's bad, Dominic," Antonio said, his voice a dry rasp. "The Marcanos are framing this as a kidnapping, an insult to their entire family. Marco is his father's nephew, and he's screaming for blood. They're demanding the girl be returned." Dominic's face was carved from stone. "She is not the girl, and she's not being returned anywhere." Antonio sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Boss, be reasonable. This is escalating. They've threatened the shipping routes. They're talking to the unions. This is bad for business. All over a server, she's a nobody. She is not nobody," Dominic said, his voice lethally soft. "Fine," Antonio said, his patience snapping. "She's a person, but she's one person. This is our entire operation. Give her back, or use her. Tell them you'll give her back. Set a meeting. We use her as bait. We take out Marco, and this whole thing is over." Before Antonio had even finished the word bait, Dominic was moving. He was across the desk in a blur, his hand clamping around Antonio's throat, lifting the older man from his chair and slamming him against the wall of books. "Say that again," Dominic snarled. his face inches from Antonio's, all pretense of civilization gone, replaced by the pure, cold killer beneath. "Say her name like she's a piece of meat. I dare you." Antonio choked, his face turning a dark, mottled purple, his eyes wide with pure, undiluted terror. He had known Dominic his whole life, had served his father. He had never ever been on the receiving end of this. "Boss, please." Luca tensed by the door but knew better than to move. Dominic held him for another agonizing second, the promise of death vibrating in his hand. Then, with a sound of pure disgust, he shoved Antonio away. The consigliere crumpled into the chair, gasping, clutching his throat. "You ever," Dominic said, his voice dangerously calm as he straightened his cuffs, "suggest using her for anything. You ever imply she is anything less than the most important person in this house, and I will kill you myself. Do you understand me?" "Yes, boss," Antonio wheezed, his voice ruined. "Crystal, get out, both of you," Dominic snapped, when they were gone. He stood at the window, his hands clenched, his body rigid with a rage so profound it shook him. He was losing control. For a girl. For Elena. He found her in the garden, pruning roses with Mrs. Greco. She looked up when he approached, a small, shy smile touching her lips, her face glowing from the morning sun. The sight of her, so peaceful, so unaware, was like a knife in his gut. "Elena, walk with me," he said. His voice was flat. The smile vanished. She saw the look on his face. She wiped her hands on her apron and followed him, her heart sinking. They stood on the same terrace where he had kissed her. "What's wrong?" she asked. He didn't look at her. He stared out at his city. "The Marcanos," he said, "have declared a feud. They say I stole you. They are threatening my men, my business. They are starting a war. Because of you." He said it as a simple fact, but each word struck her, a physical blow. This was her fault. The safety, the kindness, the kiss. It was all an illusion. She was a poison. "I have to go," she said, her voice hollow, backing away. I'll leave. I'll go back. I'll turn myself into Marco. I won't let anyone get hurt because of me. Not again." "Stop," he commanded. She shook her head, tears blurring her vision, her hands pressed to her mouth. "No, you don't understand. This is what I do. I break things. I ruin people. If I go back, he'll leave you alone. He just wants me." He grabbed her arm, not gently this time. His grip was iron. He spun her to face him. "Do you think I care about the shipping routes?" he demanded, his voice raw with an emotion she had never heard. "Do you think this is about business?" "It's about a war," she cried, pulling against his grip. "People will die because of me. People die every day." He roared, his control snapping. "This is the world I live in. This is what I am. I can't be the reason," she sobbed, hitting his chest, her blows weak, pathetic. "Let me go. Please, Dominic, I have to protect you. Let me go." "Protect me?" He laughed, a harsh, broken sound that was more like a sob. He grabbed her by the shoulders, his eyes blazing, all the cold barriers gone, leaving only a terrifying, fiery vulnerability. "You leaving wouldn't protect me." He pulled her against him, crushing her to his chest, his arms locking around her like steel bands, his face buried in her hair, and his whole body was tense, as if he was holding on to her to keep from drowning. "It would destroy me." She froze, the words echoing in the space between them. He was not a man who said things he did not mean. He was holding her, not to protect her, but because he needed her. Her fight evaporated. She melted against him, her arms sliding around his back, her hands clutching the fine fabric of his shirt. She held him, her fear and shame eclipsed by a sudden, fierce, an overwhelming wave of a new emotion. She was not just a victim. She was not just a burden. She was his, and he was hers. They stood locked together, a quiet island in the coming storm. The moment stretched, perfect and profound. "Boss?" Luca's voice, sharp and urgent, shattered the silence. Dominic did not release Elena. He just turned his head, his embrace becoming a shield around her. "What?" he growled, his voice low and full of menace. "I'm sorry," Luca said, and he sounded it. But you need to hear this. A message from the Marcanos. They're not asking for war. Not yet. They're asking for a meeting. Marco himself. He says he's willing to make a deal. For the girl. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a high-end Italian restaurant in the city's financial district, closed for a private renovation. The Vescari syndicate owned the building. The Marcano family had swept it for bugs 3 times. It was as neutral as a battlefield ever got. Dominic was calm, a cold, still point in the center of the storm he was about to unleash. He dressed in a dark suit, but beneath it, Elena glimpsed the edge of a Kevlar vest. The sight made her stomach clench. "You're not going." He had told her that morning. "Yes, I am," she had said, her voice shaking but resolute. "This is about me. He's Marco. I need to see him. I need to not be afraid of him anymore." Dominic had studied her, his dark eyes searching for any sign of hesitation. He saw only a terrible, fragile resolve. He knew Marco. He knew the kind of poison a man like that left in a woman's mind. He knew that for her to ever be truly free, she had to see her old monster dwarfed by her new reality. "You will not be in the room," he said, his voice final, "but you will be there. You will be in the kitchen's dry storage office. The room is bugged. You will have an earpiece. You will hear everything. Luca and 2 other men will be in there with you. You will not make a sound, and you will not move. Understood?" "Understood," she whispered. The restaurant was heavy with the smell of stale wine and lemon polish. Elena sat on a high stool in the small, windowless office, the earpiece a cold, plastic violation in her ear. Luca stood by the door, his hand inside his jacket, his face a mask of stone. She heard them enter the main dining room, the scrape of chairs on the hardwood floor. "Vescari," a voice said. Elena's blood ran cold. Marco, it was him. The same smooth, arrogant tone that had once charmed her, then terrified her. "Marcano," Dominic's voice replied, flat and cold as marble. "This is a lot of trouble for a little runaway," Marco said, his voice laced with a mocking laugh. "I have to admit, I was surprised. Dominic, you've got a reputation, a man of taste. And you pick up my trash? She was always a charity case." Elena squeezed her eyes shut, her nails digging into her palms. Luca glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "The terms of this meeting," Dominic's voice cut in, devoid of emotion, "are simple. You will cease all operations in Belmore. You will dissolve your union fronts, and you will never, ever speak her name again. You will forget she exists. You do this, and I will let your father live out his retirement." There was a bark of laughter. "You think you're in a position to demand? You took what was mine. You stole my property." "She was never your property," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Oh, but she was," Marco sneered, and Elena could hear him leaning forward, his voice becoming conspiratorial, slimy. "And you know what? Vescari? She liked it. She's just a girl who begs. Didn't you know that? She begs on her knees. It's the only thing she's good at." Elena let out a small, strangled gasp. It was a lie, a grotesque twisting of her fear, a final, vile attempt to brand her. In the dining room, there was a moment of absolute, frozen silence. Then, Elena heard it through the earpiece. Not a word, not a gunshot. She heard the sound of bone connecting with flesh, a sharp, wet, cracking sound. It was followed by a grunt of pain and the crash of a chair sliding back. Dominic had punched him. "Now!" Luca yelled, ripping the earpiece from Elena's ear just as the world exploded. The windows of the main dining room shattered, a storm of automatic gunfire ripping through the restaurant from the street. It was an ambush. The meeting was a trap from the beginning. Luca shoved Elena to the floor, covering her with his own body. "Stay down! Stay down!" But Elena's eyes were on the door. "Dominic! Boss, get out!" Luca was yelling into his mic. The door to the office burst open. It was not Dominic. It was a Marcano gunman, his eyes wide, his gun swinging toward Luca. Luca reacted, firing twice, but a second man was right behind him, pushing into the small room. Elena screamed. Before the second man could even aim, a dark shape slammed into him from the side. It was Dominic. He must have come from the restaurant's main hallway. He was a blur of motion, his own gun in his hand. He didn't just shoot the man, he disarmed him. His hand grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it until the bones snapped, the gun clattering. He drove his elbow into the man's throat, a picture of cold, efficient violence. "Elena!" he roared, his eyes finding her on the floor. As he moved toward her, a third gunman appeared in the shattered doorway, firing wildly. "Dom!" she shrieked. Dominic didn't hesitate. He threw himself in front of her, using his own body as a shield. Elena felt the impact as he was thrown back against her, a heavy, solid weight. He grunted, a sharp, choked-off sound of pain. Luca was on his feet, firing, clearing the doorway. "Boss, are you hit?" "Shoulder." Dominic bit out. His voice strained. He was on one knee, his left arm hanging limp, a dark, wet stain already spreading across his suit jacket. He still had his gun in his right hand. He looked at Elena, his face pale, his eyes blazing with a protective fire so intense it scared her. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror, fixed on the blood. You're... Oh, God. "Rico, car, back alley, now!" Luca was shouting. "We're compromised." Dominic grabbed her, his good hand biting into her arm, and hauled her to her feet. "We're leaving." He didn't just walk. He ran, pulling her with him, his body still covering hers as they moved through the kitchen, which was now a war zone of smoke and shouting. He never let her go. He took a bullet for her, and he was still fighting, still pulling her to safety. They burst out into the back alley, where an armored sedan screeched to a halt. Luca and Rico provided cover fire, and Dominic shoved Elena into the back seat, tumbling in after her. The doors slammed and the car fishtailed, tires smoking. As it sped away from the chaos, they were safe. The Vescari estate was a fortress of silence. The adrenaline of the escape had faded, leaving a terrifying, ringing quiet. Dominic sat in the massive marble bathroom of his own suite, stripped to the waist. His Kevlar vest was on the floor, but the bullet had found a gap, tearing through the thick muscle of his left shoulder. It was a through and through, but it was bleeding. A lot. "I need a doctor," Elena said, her voice shaking, her hands fluttering uselessly. "No," Dominic said, his voice tight with pain. He was sitting on a closed toilet lid, his head bowed, his good hand braced on his knee. "No doctors. They report to the wrong people. The bleeding's slowing. It's clean." "It is not clean," she cried, her fear turning to a strange, sharp anger. "It's a bullet hole. You need stitches." He looked up at her. His face was ashen, sweat beading on his forehead, but his eyes were clear. "Do you know how?" She stopped. "What? Do you know how to stitch a wound?" She stared at him. I worked in a diner. I'm not a surgeon. I saw your hands in the kitchen," he said, his voice a pained rasp. "You're steady, Mrs. Greco keeps a full medical kit in her pantry, for the staff, for accidents, get it, and the bottle of brandy from my desk." She ran. She came back with the metal box and the bottle. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely open the latch. "I can't," she whispered, looking at the sterile needle, the suture thread. "Dominic, I can't. I'll hurt you." "You won't," he said. He took the bottle of brandy from her, uncapped it, and poured a generous amount directly into the wound. He didn't scream. He just hissed, his entire body going rigid, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his knee. He handed her the bottle. "Now you," he said. I don't drink." "Drink," he commanded. She took a swallow. The liquor burned a path down her throat, but it stopped the shaking. "Okay," she whispered. More to herself than to him, she threaded the needle. She poured antiseptic onto a clean, white cloth. She knelt in front of him. The bathroom was silent. Save for the sound of his ragged breathing, she gently, so gently, began to wipe the blood from his skin. He was all hard planes and coiled muscle, his skin warm, and he was covered in his own blood. Blood he had shed for her. The reality of it hit her, the gun, the impact, the way he had thrown himself in front of her. He could have died. He had been willing to die. For her. A sob. A great, Racking, agonizing sound tore from her throat. The cloth fell from her hand and she broke down, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking. I never wanted anyone hurt for me. She wept, the words muffled by her hands. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Dominic. He was silent. She felt him move, and his good hand, his right hand, came up. It was covered in his own blood, but he didn't care. He cupped her jaw, his touch surprisingly gentle, and made her look at him. His eyes were dark, full of pain, but also full of something else, something raw and real and terrifying. Elena, he said, his voice rough. I've been in this life since I was 15. I've broken bones. I've taken beatings. I've been cut. He leaned closer, his gaze holding hers captive. I have never bled for anyone, ever. Not until you. Her tears stopped. She just stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. He wasn't just a man who had protected her. He was a man who had chosen her, above his own body, above his own survival. His thumb stroked her cheek, smearing blood and tears. His eyes dropped to her mouth. I'm sorry, she whispered again, but this time she wasn't sure what for. Don't be, he growled. He kissed her. It was not the slow, careful kiss from the garden. This was a claiming. It was raw and desperate, and tasted of brandy and salt and the metallic tang of blood. His mouth was hard on hers, possessive, a drowning man's grasp for air. She didn't pull away. She didn't hesitate. She met him, her hands coming up to frame his face, her fingers tangling in his hair, her mouth opening for him. It was a kiss of survival, a confirmation of life in the face of death. It was a fire, and she was more than willing to burn. He groaned, a low, pained sound that was half pleasure, and he pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. His breathing was ragged, his eyes closed. I can't think when you're this close, he breathed, and I need you to stitch me up, Elena, before I bleed all over my floor. She did it. Her hands, miraculously, were steady. She cleaned the wound, her touch careful, almost reverent on his skin. She pulled the black thread through his flesh, her movements quick and efficient. He never flinched, he just watched her, his gaze a physical weight, his eyes tracking her every move. When she was done, she taped a sterile white bandage over the new stitches. Her hands lingered on his skin. It's done, she whispered. He didn't say thank you. He just stood up, his good arm snaking around her waist, and pulled her to her feet. He was unsteady, pale, but he was still strong. He lifted her, his right arm scooping her legs, and carried her out of the bathroom as if she weighed nothing. He carried her into his bedroom, a vast, dark room dominated by a massive bed. He didn't take her to her guest room. He took her to his. He laid her gently on the bed, on top of the dark gray comforter. He stood over her, a wounded colossus, his bare chest taped, his eyes black with a need that went far beyond lust. It was a need to possess, to protect, to merge. He braced his good arm on the bed, leaning over her, but he didn't touch her. He just looked at her, his breathing still harsh. Elena, he said, his voice a rasp. I want you. I've wanted you since I saw you in that hallway, but I am not him. I am not Marco. He looked at her, his jaw tight. If you say stop, I stop. Even if it kills me, no matter what I want, you say the word, and I walk away. He was giving her all the power. He was giving her the one thing no one else ever had, the choice. She looked up at this terrible, beautiful, violent man, this man who had bled for her, this man who had offered her his word and his body as a shield. He was not her rescuer. He was her equal. She lifted a trembling hand, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Don't stop, she whispered. His control shattered. He came down on her, not with violence, but with a desperate, all-consuming hunger. His mouth found hers again, and it was no longer a kiss. It was a conversation, a vow. His hand, his good hand, was in her hair, his other arm, the wounded one, bracing him. Her clothes were a barrier. His were. Her hands were shaking as she went to the buttons of her shirt, but he was faster, his fingers sure and quick, pushing the fabric aside. She fumbled with the waistband of his trousers. Clothes fell to the floor. discarded armor. His mouth left hers, trailing fire down her throat, to the faint, faded bruise on her collarbone. He kissed it, a gentle, reverent press of his lips, as if he could erase the past, erase Marco, with his touch. Her hands, which had been trembling, found their strength. She explored him, her palms flat against the warm, solid planes of his chest, learning the hard ridges of his ribs, the coiled strength of his abdomen. He was real. He was here. He was hers. When his skin finally touched hers, it was an explosion. It was not a gentle coming together. It was a collision of two people who had been alone for too long. It was heat and friction and a desperate, searching intimacy. His movements were strong, possessive, but he was watching her. His eyes locked on hers, asking 1,000 questions, and she was answering every one. Her body arching to meet his, her hands clutching his back. It was intense. A surge of emotion so powerful it left them both breathless, clinging to each other as the world dissolved. Later, long after the passion had quieted, she lay tucked against his side. The storm had passed. His wounded arm was propped on a pillow, but his good arm was wrapped tightly, protectively, around her waist, holding her as if he would never let her go. She rested her head on his uninjured shoulder, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. For the first time in her life. She was not a ghost. She was not prey. She was home. The weeks that followed the ambush blurred into a new, strange reality. Elena's life was no longer her own. It was inextricably woven with his. She woke in his bed, the sheets smelling of his skin. He was often gone before she stirred, but his presence remained, the heavy, expensive watch on the nightstand, the dark suit laid out, a pristine set of armor for the day. She was learning his world, not through explanation, but through osmosis. She learned that power was not about shouting. It was about the way men twice his age fell silent when he entered a room. It was about a single, quiet phone call that could shut down a shipping port for 3 hours or make a politician's legal troubles disappear. She learned that the lines between right and wrong were not blurred. In Dominic's world, they simply did not exist. There was only family, and there was everyone else. She was also learning the man. She saw both sides of him, and the contrast was a constant, dizzying shock. In the mornings, when he found her in the kitchen before dawn, his eyes were soft. He would undo his cuffs, his shoulders still bandaged beneath his shirt, and drink the coffee she poured for him, his fingers brushing hers, a silent, intimate conversation. At night, he would listen as she read a book aloud to him in his study, his head back, his eyes closed, the tension of the day melting from his shoulders. In these moments, he was just Dominic. But then, she would see the other man. One afternoon, she brought him a tray of food and paused by the study door, which was slightly ajar. He was on the phone, his voice a blade of ice. "I don't care about his reasons," Dominic was saying, his voice lethally calm. "He was warned. He moved against us. Make an example of him. I want his entire operation dismantled by midnight, and I want him to know I'm the one doing it. Let him watch." Elena had flinched, a cold dread washing over her. The man on the other end of that phone was being destroyed. Dominic hung up and looked up, sensing her. His eyes, cold and merciless a second before, found hers, and they changed. The hardness evaporated. The ice melted, and he was just Dominic again. "Elena," he said, his voice softening, "come in." She walked in, her hands trembling slightly. She was falling in love with a man who could order a life destroyed between one breath and the next. She was terrified of him, and she was terrified for him, and yet she had never felt safer. The first real test of that safety came on a bright, cold Tuesday. Dominic's younger sister, Sophia, a whirlwind of bright lipstick and expensive perfume, had descended on the estate. She was 24, bubbly, and the only person in the world who was not afraid of Dominic. "You are turning this poor girl into a hermit?" "Dom," Sophia declared at breakfast, waving her fork at her brother. "She's pale. She needs sun. She needs to see something that isn't your gloomy, brooding face. We are going shopping." Dominic's face hardened instantly. "No. Yes, Sophia countered, her chin jutting out. We are going to buy her a dress for the fundraiser. We'll be in the most secure shopping district in the city. You can send your entire army. Luca can come. Rico can come. They can all buy shoes. I don't care, but she is coming with me. Dominic looked at Elena. He hated it. The thought of her outside these walls, outside his immediate control, was a physical weight on his chest, but he saw the flicker of hope in her eyes, the simple, girlish desire for a normal afternoon. 2 cars, he said, his voice clipped. Luca and Rico. You stay on comms. You go nowhere but the boutique. Nowhere. You are in and you are out. Yay, Sophia squealed. The afternoon was a breath of fresh air. The boutique was quiet, luxurious, and Elena felt, for the first time in months, like a normal young woman. Luca and Rico stood like statues by the door, their eyes scanning every person who entered. He's terrifying, I know, Sophia whispered to Elena, holding up a dark blue silk dress. But he's different with you. He's quieter. I haven't seen him this calm since our mother was alive. Elena blushed, her heart doing a strange flip. They were laughing, their arms full of clothes, when they walked back out to the quiet, cobblestone side street where the car was waiting. It happened in less than 3 seconds. A black van, coming from the wrong direction, screeched onto the curb, blocking their car. The side door slid open. 3 men in ski masks and tactical gear burst out. "Sophia, get back!" Luca yelled, shoving her toward the car as he drew his weapon. Rico was already moving, but one of the men was faster. He raised a stun gun and fired, the barbs hitting Luca in the chest. Luca went down, convulsing. Rico fired, but another man grabbed Elena. His hand clamped over her mouth. A chemical-soaked rag pressed to her face. It wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a fight. It was a professional. Targeted extraction. They ignored Sophia, who was screaming. They ignored the downed guards. They were there for Elena. "Tell Dominic," the man hissed in her ear, his voice rough. "The Marcanos are calling in his debt." The world dissolved into a sickly, sweet blackness. When Dominic got the call, he was in a meeting with his top enforcers. Luca, his voice ragged from the stun gun, delivered the news. "They took her. Boss, they took her." The room fell silent. Dominic Vascari did not move. He did not speak. He just stared at the phone in his hand, his face a perfect blank mask of ice. Antonio, the consigliere, cleared his throat. "Boss, we need a plan. We'll find—" Dominic's head turned, very slowly. He looked at Antonio, then with a speed that was almost too fast to see. His right arm swept across the massive mahogany desk, the entire contents of the desk, a $20,000 laptop, a crystal decanter of whiskey. Stacks of reports, a heavy glass paperweight, were sent flying. They crashed against the far wall in a spectacular explosion of glass, liquid and plastic. The room, filled with the hardest men in Belmore, flinched as one. They had never seen him lose control. Ever. Dominic stood up, his chair scraping back. He was not shouting. He was not raging. He was vibrating, a human tuning fork of pure, unadulterated violence. "Get me a Marcano," he whispered. "Boss," Luca said. "We don't know." "I don't care which one." Dominic snarled, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "I don't care if it's a driver, a dealer, or a goddamn dishwasher. Find one. I want a Marcano in my basement in the next 20 minutes, or every single one of you is going to wish you were dead. Go." They scrambled, fleeing the room as if escaping a fire. They brought him a low-level enforcer named Paulie, snatched from a bar 2 blocks from Marcano territory. They brought him to the wine cellar, a cold, damp room beneath the estate. When Dominic walked in, Paulie, who was tied to a steel chair, started sweating. Dominic circled him once, like a shark. He was in his shirt sleeves, his shoulder throbbing from the tension. He picked up a corkscrew from a nearby table. "Where is she?" Dominic asked, his voice conversational. I don't know what you're talking about," Paulie stammered. "I ain't done nothin'," Dominic sighed. "Paulie, I'm gonna ask you 3 times. The first time, you're gonna lie to me. That's fine. I expect it." He grabbed Paulie's left hand and, with a quick, clinical motion, jammed the corkscrew straight through the man's palm, pinning it to the wooden arm of the chair. The scream was immediate, high-pitched, and agonizing. The second time, Dominic continued, his voice unchanged as the man wept. "You're going to tell me the truth." He leaned in, his face inches from the man's. "Where is she?" "An old distillery. By the river," Paulie shrieked, his mind broken by the casual, immediate brutality. "The old Callaway plant. It's Marco. It's all Marco. He's got her in the basement. Please, God, please." Dominic straightened up. He looked at the man, his eyes devoid of all light, all mercy. "And the third time," he said softly, "is just to make sure you understand what happens when you touch what is mine." He nodded to Luca, who stood in the doorway, his face pale. "Kill him. Burn his car. Send the ashes to his boss." Elena woke up to the smell of rust and cold, damp earth. Her head was throbbing, her mouth filled with a foul, chemical taste. She was on a concrete floor, her hands tied behind her back with thick, abrasive rope. A single caged bulb hummed overhead, casting a sickly yellow light. A basement. She was in a basement. Look who decided to wake up. She looked up. It was him. The burly man from her apartment, the one whose arm Luca had broken. His arm was in a sling, his face a mask of smug hatred. "You've caused a lot of trouble. Alessia," he sneered, using her old name. "A lot. Marco's on his way. He's very excited to see you. But first we wait. We let your new man sweat. We let him tear his city apart looking for you." He crouched in front of her. "He's not coming. You know, he's a businessman. He'll cut his losses. He'll trade you for a shipping route. You're just a girl. You're nothing." He was wrong. The word, nothing, struck her, and instead of fear, she felt a cold, sharp spike of rage. She was not nothing. She was the woman Dominic Viscari had bled for. She stayed quiet, her eyes down, letting him believe she was broken. She let him taunt her. He talked about what Dominic would do, how he would panic, how he would suffer. He was enjoying this. That was his mistake. As he paced, gloating, Elena worked. She was not the same girl who had run from Marco. She had lived in a house of professionals. She'd watched Luca and his men train. She'd watched them check restraints, practice knots, run security drills. The rope was thick, but the knot was sloppy. He was an enforcer, not a specialist. She began to work, her fingers pulling, creating slack, her wrists rubbing against the rough fibers. She felt the skin tear, but she didn't stop. She focused on a memory. Luca, showing a new recruit. It's all about the tension, find the primary loop, create slack. It's a puzzle. The man, satisfied, sat down at a small table. Unwrapping a sandwich, he turned on a small, grainy television. Her right hand was free. She didn't move. She waited. Her heart a trip hammer against her ribs. She slowly, silently, worked the ropes from her other wrist. She was free. She stayed on the floor, her hands tucked behind her back. She waited. He finished his sandwich, crumpled the paper, and stood up. Stretching, he turned his back to her, walking to a corner of the room to relieve himself in a rusted metal drum. She moved. She grabbed a heavy, rusted piece of rebar from a pile of debris on the floor. She was on her feet in one motion. As he turned, zipping his pants, his eyes widened in shock. She swung the bar with all the strength she possessed, a scream of pure, primal rage tearing from her throat. It connected with his good shoulder. He roared in pain, stumbling back. He hadn't expected her to fight. He hadn't expected her to be strong. She didn't wait. She ran. She bolted for the stairs, a flimsy set of wooden steps leading up into darkness. She heard him crashing after her. Screaming curses, she burst through a door at the top and found herself in a vast, dark, cavernous space. The distillery? It smelled of mold and old whiskey. "You're not going anywhere, you!" he roared, right behind her. She was almost at the far wall, at a massive sliding metal door. When he caught her, his hand tangled in her hair, yanking her back. She screamed as she fell, her head hitting the concrete. He was on her in an instant, his good hand grabbing her throat, the other, in its sling, pressing down on her. "I'm going to kill you," he wheezed, his face purple with rage. I don't even care what Marcos says." The world was narrowing to a pinpoint. She was going to die. A sound like thunder exploded through the warehouse. The massive metal door she had been running for was torn from its hinges, crashing inward. Light flooded the space. Men in black tactical gear poured in, fanning out, and in the center, framed by the smoke and the light, was Dominic. He was not in a suit. He was dressed in the same black armor as his men, his face a mask of cold, unholy fury. He saw her. He saw the man on top of her, his hand at her throat. The man saw him, too. He panicked, pulling his gun, trying to grab Elena to use as a shield. He was too slow. Dominic didn't shout. He didn't negotiate. He raised his handgun and fired. One single, precise shot. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The man's head snapped back. He went limp, collapsing on top of her. For a second, there was absolute silence. Elena was frozen, trapped under the dead weight, staring. Dominic was across the room before the echo of the gunshot had faded. He hauled the body off her, his hands finding her, checking her, his eyes wild. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you? Did he hurt you?" No, she gasped, her hands clinging to the front of his tactical vest. She was shaking, her mind in pieces. You came for me." He grabbed her face, his hands hard, forcing her to look at him. His jaw was clenched, a fresh, bleeding cut high on his cheekbone from the fight to get in. His eyes were black, blazing with a terrifying, protective fire. "Always," he growled, his voice thick. He looked around. The distillery was not just breached, it was on fire. His men were setting charges. He was not here for a rescue. He was here for an erasure. "Even if I have to burn this city." He ripped off his heavy outer coat, the thick, armored fabric, and wrapped it around her. It swallowed her, smelling of smoke, gunpowder, and him. He didn't ask her to walk. He scooped her into his arms, his wounded shoulder be damned. He carried her out as the first of the charges detonated, the building groaning as it began to die. He walked through the chaos, through the smoke and the shouting, as his men secured the perimeter. The warehouse roared behind them. A funeral pyre for the Marcanos, a beacon of his promise. His jaw was bloody. The world was on fire, but his eyes never left her face. The fire at the distillery was not an end. It was a declaration. In the days that followed, Dominic Vascari began to dismantle the Marcano syndicate, not with the fire of a sudden war, but with the cold, creeping ice of a final winter. He did not order raids. He did not send gunmen into the streets. What he did was far more terrifying. Elena watched from the fortress of his home, a silent, pale witness. She saw him on the phone, his voice never rising above a calm, polite murmur, and then, hours later, she would hear the news, filtered through Luca or a quiet television report. A Marcano shipping convoy was seized at the port by anonymous federal agents. A string of their front businesses, restaurants and laundromats, failed their health and safety inspections, all on the same day, and were shut down, their assets frozen. Key lieutenants were arrested on decades-old warrants that had suddenly, mysteriously, been activated. Dominic was not just cutting off the snake's head, he was poisoning its entire bloodstream. He was erasing the Marcano family from the city's ledger, piece by piece, and with every victory, a small piece of the man she loved seemed to freeze. He was softer with her than he had ever been. He would return to the estate late, his face etched with a bone-deep weariness, and find her in the library, waiting. He would pull her into his lap, burying his face in her hair, and just hold her. He would kiss her with a desperate, quiet hunger, as if she were the only thing holding him to the ground. But she saw the other side. She saw the man who left those meetings, his eyes like polished stones, his shoulders rigid. She saw the monster he was becoming to keep her safe, the cold, ruthless king who would burn his own city to protect his queen. She saw the blood he was spilling, metaphorically and, she suspected, literally. And she saw that it was staining him. She found him one night, long after midnight, in his study. He was not working. He was standing in the dark, a single glass of bourbon in his hand, staring at a map of the city. The map was covered in red marks, a web of Marcano territories, all of which were now, she assumed, his. She came up behind him, her bare feet silent on the thick rug. She slid her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his strong, warm back. He was tense, his muscles like coiled steel. "You haven't slept," she whispered. "I can't," he said, his voice a low rasp. "There's still a few pieces. Marco's father, Dominic," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She pulled away, forcing him to turn and face her. In the dim light from the hallway, she could see the strain around his eyes, the coldness in his expression. "You're in pain," she said, her hand coming up to touch his face. His stitched shoulder was long healed, but this was a different, deeper wound. "You're doing this for me, and it's killing you." He shook his head, his hand covering hers, pressing it to his cheek. "It's necessary, Elena, to keep you safe, to finish this." "By becoming them?" she asked, her voice breaking. "By becoming a man who burns everything he touches? I don't want that. I don't want a kingdom. Dominic, especially not one built from your pain. I don't care about kingdoms," he growled, his grip tightening. "I don't care about any of it. There is only you. Do you understand that? I will tear down the world for you." "But I don't want you to," she cried, pulling back, her eyes filling with tears. "I want you. The man who brought me tea, the man who held me when I was broken. Not this ghost. Look at yourself, Dominic. You're winning, but you're losing. Please don't lose yourself." He stared at her, his dark eyes searching hers. He saw no fear of him. He saw only fear for him. She was not a prize he was protecting. She was his anchor. And she was telling him he was drifting into an ocean so dark he might never come back. He looked at his own hands, half expecting to see them covered in blood. Her words had reached him, a single, pure note cutting through the symphony of his rage. She was right. He wasn't just destroying the Marcanos. He was destroying his own chance at the peace he had found only with her. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the first one that felt like it had reached his lungs in weeks. He pulled her to him, his embrace no longer desperate, but solid, sure. "Okay," he whispered into her hair. "Okay, one more meeting, a final one, and I do it your way." The next day, a summons was sent, not to Marco, who had vanished, presumed dead or in a very deep, permanent hole. It was sent to Antonio Marcano, the old man, the head of the family, Marco's uncle. The meeting was held in a public park, on a cold, bright morning. No guns, no guards within 50 yards, just two men on a park bench, two kings of a dying era. Elena watched from a car, too far away to hear. Luca at her side, Dominic, his face calm, his hands resting on his knees, made his offer. It was not a threat. It was a release. "You have nothing left," he said, his voice quiet, carrying on the wind. "Your businesses are gone. Your men are scattered. Your nephew is gone. You have two choices. You stay here, and I will methodically, painfully, and personally tear apart what little is left of your life. I will take your home, your name, and your last breath." The old man, his face a gray mask of defeat, just stared at the ducks on the pond. "Or," Dominic continued, "you leave. You take your wife, your grandchildren. You have a quiet account in the Caymans. I've left it for you. It's enough. You go to Florida, you go to Italy, you go wherever you want, but you never, ever come back to Belmore. You disappear, and you live." It was the ultimate, final power play, not to destroy, but to banish, to grant life on his terms. Antonio Marcano was silent for a full minute. He looked at Dominic, at this young, powerful man who had taken everything from him, and who was now, incomprehensibly, offering him an escape. "He was a fool," the old man rasped, his voice like gravel. "My nephew. He was a fool for a girl." "He was a fool," Dominic corrected, his voice flat, "for thinking she was just a girl." The old man nodded, a slow, tired gesture. He pushed himself up from the bench, his bones cracking in the cold. "Florida," he said, "it's warm." He walked away, a ghost in a $1,000 suit, and he never looked back. The war was over. The silence that fell over the city was profound. The Vescari name was now the only name. Dominic was the undisputed king, but the victory felt hollow. Elena found she could not breathe in the estate. It was a fortress. It was a monument to a war fought over her. Every silent room, every watchful guard, reminded her of the blood that had been spilled, of the monster Dominic had almost become. "I need to leave," she told him. 2 weeks later, they were in the garden, the first crocuses pushing up through the cold earth. He froze, his blood running cold. "Leave? Not you," she said quickly, her hands grabbing his. "The city, this house. It's too heavy. Dominic, it's full of ghosts. I need air. I need a place that isn't a battlefield." He looked at her, at the quiet strength in her eyes. She was not the trembling girl from the hotel hallway. She was not the broken victim from the apartment. She was a woman who had faced her demons and his. She was a woman who had saved him from himself. He understood. He was a king, but his kingdom was a cage for both of them. "I know a place," he said. He drove her himself. No guards, no entourage, just him and her. In a sleek, anonymous black car, they drove for 3 hours, heading south toward the coast. The gray steel of Belmore dissolved into green fields, and then into the bright, sharp blue of the ocean. The house was not a fortress. It was made of glass and pale wood, perched on a rugged cliff overlooking the sea. It was open and bright, and the only sound was the crash of the waves and the cry of the gulls. "It was my mother's," he said, his voice quiet, his hand resting on the small of her back as they stood on the wide, wind-swept deck. She hated the city. She used to come here to paint. Elena closed her eyes, breathing in the salt in the air. It was the first clean breath she had taken in years. "It's beautiful," she whispered. They stayed for a week. They walked on the beach. They cooked in the simple, bright kitchen. They slept with the windows open, the sound of the ocean lulling them. The king of Belmore was gone. There was only Dominic. On the last day, he took her out onto the cliffs, the wind whipping her hair across her face. He was carrying a small, heavy case. He opened it. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a sleek, black handgun. Elena stiffened. "I want you to be safe," he said, his voice calm. "Even from me, especially from me." He took the gun out, his movements practiced. "I'm going to teach you how to use this, not so you can be a killer, but so you will never, ever be a victim again, so you always have the choice." She learned. Her hands were steady. He stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her, his strong, warm hands guiding hers, his body a solid, living shield. She learned the weight, the balance, the recoil. She learned the power. When she was done, she put the gun down and turned in his embrace. She was not afraid of it, and she was not afraid of him. "I've protected you like you're mine, Elena," he said, his voice rough against the sound of the wind, his dark eyes searching hers. "For months, because you are." He took a small velvet box from his pocket. He didn't kneel. He just stood before her, his equal. "Will you finally let yourself be?" He opened the box. The diamond was not a gaudy, massive stone. It was a simple, perfect, brilliant cut stone that glittered with all the light of the ocean. She didn't cry. She smiled, a real, brilliant smile that reached her eyes. She had been rescued, yes. But she had also fought. She had also saved him. This was not a rescue. This was a choice. "Yes," she said. He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. And then he kissed her. It was not the desperate kiss of their reunion or the careful kiss in the garden. It was a kiss of promise, of peace. It was deep and slow, and it tasted of salt air and forever. He held her, his arms locked around her, his face buried in her wind-tangled hair, and they stood on the edge of the world. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her hand, with its new, glittering weight, resting on his heart. "You brought me to your room," she whispered, her voice full of a love so profound it was a physical ache. "But you gave me the whole world." Thank you so much for listening to our story. We're so grateful to have you here with us. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this story, please be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more. We value your thoughts, so please share your comments with us.